Well, I'm just wondering, though, do you think that Nigerians have a general list of expectations in terms of what they expect of, you know, of a cabinet, regardless of which office, or beg your pardon, which party is in power? Some people say that oftentimes they view the job of ministers, or, you know, the appointment of ministers, as job for the boys, job for those who help the government come to power or help the president achieve his aim. And that doesn't seem to have changed with this particular appointment.
Well, I think, well, I always say that everything's a balance. First of all, it's a team that got the president into office. And that meant they had proven some level of competence if they could help him deliver office. And so automatically, I would say they had a front row seat in being given responsibility to carry on what we have all collectively sought to achieve, basically. So there's a sense in which it becomes a job for the boys, inevitably, whichever way we like it. However, there is the other side in terms of what is the agenda of government and where we want to get to. Now, I think part of the problem, which I've said before, is that our governments in Nigeria have not recognized the value of government creating a narrative for leadership. Or to use a simple English, they've not recognized the value of creating a conversation, a statement that says, this is what we intend to become and be. And that statement, therefore, begins to help determine how you set up things. I was having a discussion with some of my staff in my office yesterday. We were discussing how many organizations, for example, put together their training programs or their capacity programs. And we said the biggest challenge for most organizations is they don't have an idea of where do we intend to go and who fits into where we're going. And once that is not established, there's no narrative for now determining what else we're going to do thereafter. So you end up falling back to the tried and tested rule, which is what we have in Nigeria, of going around and saying, Tokyo Bayan has this qualification, so he's competent by qualification to hold a high office. That's all we're able to say. And that's when you see when you get there. So, your example, I was humorously saying that I noticed that you have about 6 or 7 lawyers in this whole list, by implication, meaning lawyers are a little bit more including Lai Mohammed, who most people think of more of a spokesman, but is actually a lawyer. And so lawyers seem to be more recognized as being capable of running things in Nigeria. Where are they more? I'm just using that as an example. What are our expectations? The president needed, and I've said that before, one of the big challenges in the president's appointment is that the president has not created a philosophical foundation. A philosophical foundation is that the men must be found to be clean. And there was so much noise on the clean that everybody began to expect that we would have angels as ministers, which was not possible. First of all, basically, some of the best leaders in the world have problems. I understand, I had you arguing about a brilliant person. I know some of the best leaders in the world have certain issues you may not be able to celebrate them on, other than the absolute corruption matters. So there is a challenge. The president has not said, the men I'm going to be bringing in will be men who will provide leadership. I think I was sharing with someone, I said the biggest difference between leadership and managers, and what we tend to be appointing in Nigeria is managers, is vision.
Okay, let me bring this one in. I mean, many groups, okay, let me say specifically, young people in this country, not happy, a lot of them, with this list. They don't think they've got enough representation of young people in this list, even in the cabinet.
Yeah, I'm not even sure who the young person is there. I mean, even though I consider myself young, but the truth is that I'm getting to be middle age. But I'm getting to say that that is a factor. There is a little bit of an absence of evident headhunting in this group. That's obvious. There's no. When you look at it, you're forced to look at it that political considerations played more of a role. Inevitably, I'm just being an objective assessor. Doesn't mean they won't do a good job. They might do a good job, and that's probably what we want at the end of the day. But you don't see evidence of any out-of-the-box development. And maybe unless the president is going to use his special advisors to give us out-of-the-box perspective.
Well, one of the things, because that's another tricky part, the Constitution is pretty specific in terms of the list of ministers that we must have. At the very least, we're expecting 36.
Agreed.
And the government has promised to be lean. On that count, it would seem that 36 is quite large. Should we be looking to see anything surprising in terms of special advisors?
Well, officially, the president already has an approval for 15 special advisors. And we've only appointed 4, basically. So I assume before he asked for 15, he had thought about something, basically. I think it's not the ministers that make the government necessarily overbloated, even if you have 36 or 45. It is the ministries. Because for every ministry comes overheads and comes a lot of other things that are used to support each infrastructure. basically, as you come in. And it's those support for the infrastructure that creates the bloatedness of government a lot of time. So even if you streamline the ministries, which the president has said he would do, and it's probably a necessary thing, constitutionally, you still must have 36 ministers. Yes, we must do that. What it does, for example, is therefore it means that you've got to find a creative way to bring on board other people that you need in the system. Because I always say that the biggest danger that happens in many organizations is that whenever there is pressure and stress, we go after the human resource. And the human resource is actually your most important resource. If you get the correct human beings in place, with minimal resources on the other side, they can turn anything into anything. So what I would say is that as much as you want to streamline government, you must not skimp on getting right persons into right places. And when you're talking about the young people, for example, not necessarily because they're just young, but the truth is that there are many things that young people now in Nigeria have an exposure and a capacity to do that the older generation. When I went to university, for example, I'm computer literate now, but when I went to university, there was no personal computer. We had a mainframe in Ife that was supposed to be state of the art. Now, these young people, my son thinks of the computer not as a tool, he thinks of it as an extension of his fingers. And that is the world that we're living in now. So you almost need also, not just because you want to pacify the young, because you also need to connect with the emerging world that they represent.
And they also say that, I mean, besides that,
yes,
young people worked with him and make sure he won. Yes. Young people voted him in and make sure he won. So if you're looking at compensating people who maybe played some part in politics or who voted him, young people feature on both fronts.
There is a gap. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we do have a slightly gerontocratic nation. Our tendency in Nigeria is that the elders assume wisdom, and the young people.
Not forgetting, we had young people, someone who was young as president, who headed this country, below 40.
Most of us look at it as an anomaly. I'm being frank, that's our social expectation. And we assume that if someone is older than me, assumes that automatically means he's got more wisdom than me. It may be true, but it may not also be true. In many situations, it's not true. And so we lose the opportunity to harness the young.
It's very key here that we bring in this perspective of the young. You're talking about IT compliance. Recall when President Obama did come in, how he had the issue of taking his BlackBerry and matching that with security concerns. But looking at the list again, and those, you know how Nigerians have always, we all think that we don't grow old. We just want to remain and say we're middle-aged. You just said it now.
I am.
You're middle-aged. But we have 16 more that we're waiting.
Yes.
What would be your expectation? Because now we can drive, just in case they're veered off, possibly we can drive attention into areas of concerns for women and for youth.
I think somehow the president seems to have taken on board women a lot more than on many occasions, because the women have not been left out.
How come they don't think so?
Well, that's I don't know. I'm a person who is in between and between when it comes to talking about women in government. I'm always worried that we don't turn it into patronizing, because I know many women who are competent. I had a mother who was an extremely competent civil servant, became director of administration at a teaching hospital. I have a wife who is an extremely competent person. So I've never thought you should just pander to what I'll call the feminine issue, basically, because they're competent to know in their own rights. The 4 women I've seen appointed, at least from their CVs, seem to have had some pedigree. And I'm pleased with that. As we come into the next 15, I'm not sure we'll see too much of a difference, because I suspect that the president is 95% on his route towards those appointments. I think what we need to do more, if you'd ask me, is that the men that have come into these positions need to move from being managers whenever they come to becoming leaders. And then we would have a change. Otherwise, what they're doing is just supervising.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. Mr. Adetokunbo is a leadership and organizational consultant. Thank you for your time today.
It was a pleasure.
We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.